Hey, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session on the trends and predictions shaping 2026. I'm Kath Longfield, co-founder of the Business Culture Awards and Business Culture Connected. And for the last decade, we've been recognising and sharing exceptional business culture approaches. I want to thank the host of today's session, Brooke Calverley, co-founder and CEO of People Made, who work with some amazing clients and have been recognised in the last couple of years alone at the awards with both Currys and Utility Warehouse. Conversations like the one our panellists are about to have today are so helpful, not only for offering HR and other business leaders really practical insight and ideas, but also to make us realise that we're not alone in the challenges we face. So please do get involved today. There's some brilliant polls. Post your questions and your comments in the chat. And without further ado, let me hand you over to Brooke.
Thank you very much, Kath, and a very warm welcome and hello to all of you. And thank you so much for joining us. I know how many invites we all get for things like this and how busy we all are. So we really appreciate you choosing to spend some of your time with us today. Looking through the attendee list, I can see some familiar names and some old friends. So hello, as well as lots who might be new to People Made. I can also see, in fact, some of you dialing in from the East Coast. So good morning to you folks. Lots from the UK and Europe. So I hope you have some lunch in front of you. And for those of you dialing in further east, hope you've had a super day. So a very warm welcome, as I said, to you all. Right, our format for today. What I'm going to do in a few moments is share some introductions to our brilliant guests and to myself and to People Made. Just a very quick one there. Then we've got a very brief presentation for you, really just 5 slides for our 5 big themes of 26, which again will take 5 or 10 minutes or so. And then for the rest of the hour together, we're going to open up conversation with our super guests. Now, throughout, we'll pop up a few polls so we can get an idea of what's going through your minds. But also, it'd be great if you can use the chat function to ask questions as you go, not just actually for Becky and Ryan, but of course, there are hundreds of experts currently dialed in. So if you are one of those experts who have dialed in, feel free to share a thought or an observation of your own as well. These things are always much more fun if they're a little bit more interactive. So do get on the chat function. So without further ado, let me welcome Ryan and Becky. I'm so glad that you can join us, particularly I think because not only do you bring an absolute wealth of experience, but interestingly, you both have very different kind of backgrounds and come from sort of different sort of categories and branches of work. So I wondered if you'd like to begin by telling us a little bit about where you are now and how you got there. Becky, let's start with you.
Thanks, Brooke. Hi, everyone. Becky Pulley here. I'm the Global Employer Brand Leader at AstraZeneca. I've been here for about 4.5 years now, but hadn't worked in the pharma industry before. I'm a true employer brand nerd. I've potted around different industries, different companies, everything from tech right the way through to hospitality and retail, hospitals. So I've kind of been everywhere and anywhere, but again, been here for the last kind of 4 years. But yeah, very much. I refer to myself as an employer brand nerd very proudly. Delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Brooke.
Super. Thank you, Becky. And Ryan.
Everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me. Brooke, Becky, great to be here with both of you. Yeah, so my name is Ryan Finnegan. I am the Employer Branding and Talent Marketing Manager here at H&M in Stockholm. I've been here for a whopping 3 months. And prior to this, really focused on employer branding, recruitment marketing, mostly in the tech space. But for the past few years, I own a bakery with my partner in New York too. So that's a little bit of my focus for context as well. So from the big scale to the small scale. So yeah, happy to be here.
Amazing. Thanks, Ryan. And Ryan tells us it's very cold in Stockholm at the moment. So our thoughts with you, Ryan. And great to round things off. I'm Brooke. As Kath said, I'm the co-founder and leader of People Made. However, in my day job, I'm a strategy consultant. I'm lucky enough to work with all kinds of businesses, fixing all kinds of interesting and knotty people, culture, and change challenges. And hopefully I'll be able to bring a little of what I've learned along the way to the conversation. So let's give you a very quick summary of People Made, a quick intro to us. I think we're pretty unique in our approach, actually. We help organizations to adapt, to navigate change, and to perform better, really, by making sure that the culture and the experience, both for employees and customers, aligns with their business and their brand strategy. So essentially, what we're trying to do is make sure that your people on the inside can fulfill the big promises that you make on the outside. We've shaped quite a lot of the thinking actually around culture and EVP and how those things drive organizational outcomes. And we're pretty much world leading in what we do. The work itself falls around three themes. We do stuff around culture transformation, so helping organizations through the complexities of culture change, creating positive environments that sort of align with their goals. We do a lot of work around EVP and employer brand, creating great propositions and authentic brands that attract and retain talent. And we do a lot of work around experience design as well, great employee and customer experiences that serve hopefully as sort of genuine expressions of the brand's core identity. We're also lucky enough to be part of the Positive Change Group, which means that we can also draw from some fantastic expertise around communications and reporting and digital engagement too. And we're very lucky to do some of this work with some amazing brands from a really broad range of categories and sectors. So everyone from kind of tech and retail, hospitality, finance, auto, and many others from our teams in the UK, US, and Asia. Right, that is enough about us. It's never the most interesting bit of the presentation, so let's get on to the good stuff as quickly as possible. As I said at the beginning, we've got a very short presentation now outlining our thinking on these kind of 5 big themes that we're seeing very much live and at play at the moment. And then we will open up the floor to yourselves and to Becky and Ryan to run through a conversation around what they see happening in our wonderful world right now. So our 5 big themes really are around adaptability, disruption, performance, change, and meaning. So just one slide for each of these. And let's get the sort of tech and AI one out of the way as quickly as possible, because of course, we all now know it is obligatory for agencies like us to have a little AI is changing the world segment, but that's because it's true. AI has moved incredibly rapidly from being really a tool to being the system. It's no longer an add-on or simply an accelerant. It's the actual operating environment that we're now all working in. And this is starting to create, and this sounds quite scary, a truly human machine workforce, one where I think there's an ever-growing expectation to assess ever greater volumes of data faster, to make decisions faster and with greater precision too, but probably and hopefully one that still keeps humans just about in control of it all. And in this world, I think interpretation and judgment are critical, but also human authenticity more valuable than ever. And honestly, this is probably the great challenge of our era. It's the thing that we're all going to be talking to our grandkids about. The second point, I think will all feel very familiar to you too. We are seeing, certainly in our work, fragmentation across all aspects of political and social life, and it's really impacting our work. I think it's felt particularly in areas around things like policy development, well-being strategy, organizational values. Trust is really low across the board. And although I think businesses often cited as comparatively well trusted these days, certainly compared to sort of media and politics, for example, sadly, I think this is only because the trust in those institutions has fallen so badly. So we can't really pat ourselves on the back. It's not so much that business are doing a great job of retaining trust. I think it's because many other institutions are doing such a terrible job of retaining it. So it means that organizations can't let up, and they need to continually renew this contract between themselves and all of their stakeholders, and constantly sort of earn and re-earn that trust, and again to prove their trueness and their authenticity. Economic pressure, of course, inevitably follows this kind of fragmented world that we're all living in. We are seeing that it's making companies much more selective about where they invest their money, creating ever greater pressure to prove return on investment. And we're seeing this right through the value chain, both in terms of reluctance to kind of commit to, larger and longer scale sort of projects and initiatives, but instead look for things that are sort of more incremental or more bite-sized, or really look for like very strong data and rationale to demonstrate that there will be value in what they're doing. And in fact, even those companies we find that are performing strongly, they're still looking to reduce headcount in order to sort of stay agile. We also see job descriptions broadening out, asking of employees to sort of do more as companies look for that adaptability and more porous boundaries between roles and departments. And all the while, the implicit employee promise is actually becoming more explicit, as if both employer and employees are starting to renegotiate the deal and seek greater clarity about what's given and received. If AI was the first inevitability in a list like this, then change is the new normal is the second one that I'm sure you're very familiar with now. But it is simply the operating status now. It's continuous. It's really expected as a baseline. It means to be successful, businesses need what we're starting to call kind of adaptive capacity. The great challenge, though, is to find and hold on to those people who can fit and work and operate in such an adaptive environment, and then of course to foster the right culture that underpins and responds to these new demands. And as for employees, I think skills are simply the new currency. Being able to rapidly adapt existing ones or adopt new ones, it will be transformative for their careers. Finally, onto our fifth and last sort of theme before we open the floor. And we'll try and end on a slightly more positive note. So there's lots here that we've covered that kind of exerts a little bit of attention, or it acts to pull us apart. Conversely, though, and perhaps there's a bit of a reaction to that, we do find that people are searching harder than ever for meaning and connection, for clarity and sort of humanness. As things move so fast, finding those little moments to make connections becomes even more essential. So in response to this, we're starting to see businesses' people functions evolving really rapidly, redefining what engagement looks like, finding new ways to foster connection, shaping how people relate to and how they feel at work, and owning the organizational narrative. And those ones that succeed, we think, will continue to see their influence grow as they recreate community and inspire commitment and action in their people. So 5 quick headlines from us to sort of set the scene. We've got loads more thinking around stuff like this on our LinkedIn to download on our website as well. After this session, we'll also send you a copy of this short presentation as well as some slightly more in-depth papers, and I believe we've got a little special offer for you as well, so look out for that. Right, that is enough of hearing from me. I think it would be great to bring our brilliant guests now back into the conversation. So hopefully I have stopped sharing. I've got as I said, a bunch of questions kind of prepared really for you both, but please feel free to take a sidebar or a little detour if there's something else you'd like to talk about, and I will keep an eye on the chat function in case anybody else has any questions as well. But I thought both that we could start by talking about this challenge of adaptability. So we see the pressures of constant change, uncertainty. It's a reoccurring theme through all of the conversations that we're having with our clients, and what they tell us is they need to be more flexible, they need to be more agile, they need to be more adaptable than ever before. But we're curious to really understand what this means for talent. So my question for you both, and perhaps Ryan, you can kick us off with this one. How do you think we can create cultures and workplaces that thrive and adapt in this kind of constantly changing environment, but still at the same time find a way of protecting and creating a bit of stability for the talent that we're trying to attract? What feels like a knotty one. What do you think?
Yeah, what a What a question to open with. No, it's I mean, it's on my mind all the time. And I'm only 3 months in at H&M, so I can't necessarily speak to exactly how the organization here is approaching it. But I can talk about my approach to it as a team leader, and I can also talk about how I think about it as a bakery owner, with 25 employees too. Because I think from the big scale to the small scale, we're seeing this across the board. Um, Honestly, like the Serenity Prayer, can I say like that's a big tool for me. I think a lot about like what is within my control, what is not within my control, what is within my team's control, not within my team's control, and do we have the wisdom to know the difference? And how are we approaching our challenges? Like what are hills we want to die on? What are hills we don't want to die on? And I think what are things we feel super passionately about, and how do we continue to find those North Stars in like a sea of incredible uncertainty. And some of the things that are really important for me for that, from a team perspective is, I mean, there's rituals, right? There's rituals that we have to have as a team. We're never going to miss our weekly meeting. In Sweden, there's a big thing around fika culture. In H&M, there's a big thing around fika culture. And that's like you have coffee with your colleagues like twice a day and you don't miss it. And I think like taking the time out for things like that is so important so that we continue to like have these personal relationships. Even fika, you can do that virtually, have a coffee with your team. And I think that's taking the time out for things like that are really important. Things like dreaming sessions, like can we like think big and wide and, have a little bit of fun with it? And, is it so naughty to like take time to like not be hyper productive and have some time as a team to dream. I think that's really important for me. And I think something that really attracted me to a company like H&M is legacy heritage. And I think, we will talk a little bit more about this later too, but there certainly is a trend for like this craftsmanship, this slowing down, this tactile, this heritage. I know AstraZeneca is a company that's also been around for 25 years. There's legacy there. And I think that is something that really can help ground people when the world feels like it's changing so much every week. So that's a big piece of it for me too. And yeah, with our bakery also, grounding people and like, why are we doing this? What is our purpose? Do you all know our purpose? We're a queer-owned organization in a country that's not particularly moving in a direction of queer friendliness right now. So how are we, making sure that our employees know that they're participating in creating a space that's safe for others? So those are some of the things that I think about. I can't change everything, but at least within my team and within the areas where I do have control, it's like how are we anchoring and getting grounded in those ways?
Oh, thank you for kicking us off, Ryan. It's so interesting that sense of purpose, heritage, and rituals being possibly those kind of anchors and that glue. Although I love that comment you made about being mindful about what's in our control and what's not, and having the wisdom to spot the difference. I'm not sure I do a very good job of that, but we will continue to strive for that. Becky, what are your thoughts on this? What are you seeing either at AZ or elsewhere in the world around you?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I think I've come at it at a very similar angle, but slightly differently. For me, it's where I've been in companies where there has been a huge amount of change. Obviously, AstraZeneca is no different there. Is it's being having your company values as the bedrock. So if you have a really solid set of values that everyone knows that the leadership work to and actually live and breathe, that becomes your stability, that becomes your foundation. So if your business is always moving, but you've got an overarching mission and you've got those kind of really clear, here's how we do things and what we value, it kind of creates that stability within the chaos, because businesses that thrive are the ones that are able to adapt and to change. I've been in the work industry. I actually started working the year of the financial crisis. So for me, change has always been part of the background of how I work. The clearer the values are, whether that's at your team level or all the way up to a corporation level, if you all know this is how we work, this is how we operate, it just gives everyone that certainty. Between that and, as Ryan was saying, having that kind of North Star, knowing what your mission is, knowing the direction that you're going in, just kind of helps everyone have the framework within the madness. I think, as we were saying, that change is always going to happen, and companies that try and stay still are the ones that don't tend to stay around forever.
Yes, I completely hear you. And lovely to hear actually the sort of, values that you were saying there and Ryan talking about purpose, these ideas still sort of proving to be useful for organizations and active in them. Becky, would you say AstraZeneca's sort of values-led business, is it something that's kind of, often on everybody's lips? Is it something that people can kind of, not just remember, but to live to it?
Yeah, so I mean, one of our values is we follow the science, which I know sounds obvious, but I don't work in a science-based function and I don't work in a science-based role. But in fact, we did a huge piece of research last year around getting some really interesting data from audiences around do our employer brand pillars and messages, which obviously we made with your brilliant team, Brooke, do they actually resonate? Do they actually make people have a positive feeling about coming to AstraZeneca? Do they actually make a difference in terms of them wanting to apply? And being in a company where they are willingly trying to apply science and data to HR and often kind of those small cultural moments to help move things along has been absolutely fascinating. And for us, that's made a huge difference when we're looking at our messaging frameworks. We've made some tiny tweaks. It means that we're getting better engagement from different demographics and different audiences. So there are certain things that no matter what we do, we kind of come back to we're following the science, we're following the data in a way that means that we are kind of like heading in a direction that is still right for the people within the company and the people that we serve. Obviously, for us, our patients are central to everything we do. So we know if we're doing right by the people in our company, we're doing right by our patients as well, because we have to have that passion, we have to have that energy, even with everything going on around us. So yeah, they're definitely very strong here. You hear people talk about them a lot. We've had some brilliant campaigns run internally around how there's actually a huge amount of crossover. I think people tend to try and be a bit like we have this value and this value, and actually they have to knit together. So I think there's been some really nice work being done internally around how do they come together? What does the blend of those values mean? Which has been really interesting to see kind of come to life for the team, for our employees, and something that we're looking to then be able to replicate in terms of the communications we're doing externally as well.
That sounds amazing. We hear so often about the challenge of like how do we really embed values in the workplace and how do we sort of enable and equip people to live up to them. And it sounds like you've got a wealth of first-hand experience around that. So yeah, anybody listening in who'd like to know more about that, I do urge you. I'm sure she won't mind to tap up Becky. Chris, by the way, has just put a really interesting comment in the chat function. I won't divert to it just yet because actually, Chris, this might be a topic we come to in a few moments when we talk about friction in the workplace. But I'll urge everybody to review Chris's comment there and feel free to add your own thoughts if you have any. So something else that I was really interested to hear your thoughts about, and we sort of touched on it briefly in this sort of intro piece. It's around this notion of performance. It seems to be on absolutely everybody's mind right now. It's the really hot word in 2025. I think it's going to continue to be in 26. What we see is companies kind of really looking to their culture, particularly their EVPs and their employer brands, to try and drive performance within their organizations. And actually, Becky and Ryan, I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are on that and how talent has responded to that. But before we do that, I thought this might be a good moment to have our first poll for our attendees. So Lorna, I think if you wouldn't mind just popping up our first poll there about how confident are our audience, how confident are you folks that your EVP and culture is actually supporting your current performance agenda and its requirements? Do we have a poll? Has that popped up? There we go. I'll leave that on screen for everybody to fill in. We'll have a look at the results of that in a moment. But Ryan, let's come to you for a moment again, if you don't mind. What do you think has been the sort of general talent response to this kind of demand for performance? Has it landed well? Are people finding it energizing? Are they finding it exhausting? Could it have landed better? What are your observations and perceptions on this?
Energizing, I don't think is the word. And I'm gonna speak plain about this. I'm gonna speak from my heart a little bit about this. And I just I think that sort of performance, hyper performance, I think it's shifted to extraction, and I think it's not. I think it's like collapsing in on itself a little bit, and I don't, performance for the sake of performance and hyper performance and like, this types of like measurements, and it's moving into surveillance and like all this kind of, tracking. And, I think that's the pendulum has really swung, and it's like become this, it's like what kind of work can we like optimize and track and make sure that we get done, but are they decisions that last? And like, are they the right decisions? And like, are they decisions that like we're gonna this is sort of macro scale, but like maybe pick up our head and look at some of the things that we've built, as a world in the last couple of years. I'm coming from the US, and there's some certain there's things like Palantir and like things like that. And I'm just, we don't have to get into that right now, but I'm just like, you look at sometimes you pick up your head and you look at, what you've optimized and done performance for. We look at social media now. It's not even really social anymore. It's more, I mean, it's more, it's surveillance, and it's the AI slop, with AI. And there's just, I don't know that performance and hyper optimizing, and like we'll get into this in a little bit, but like reducing friction to like make things as seamless as possible and as easy as possible and at your fingertips as possible is actually like been beneficial. I think looking at things more like, what are these decisions that are going to be here for a long time? What are we thinking about in terms of a legacy? Like, how are we actually building for the future? And being thoughtful about what we do. These decisions, like I said, decisions that age well, I think is on my mind a lot. And I'm not saying it's like we do have to track performance. I think of it more as like stewardship. Like, are you stewards of the brand? Are you stewards of the company, of the mission, of what we're trying to do? Versus, are you meeting this KPI that was decided, at the last minute last year just to have a KPI on a list to hit, and I think it's like the speed with which we're getting things done and moving. We have to counter that a little bit. And I think we'll get into this topic in a little bit around friction, but I don't know. That's just me speaking plain. And, I mean, from coming from the bakery too, where I was, we take our time. There's craft. You have to move kind of slowly. You have to be aware of what's happening around you. We're not measuring our employees on how many croissants can they crank out, in a period of time. It's like, are they, being thoughtful about their work? Are they collaborating? Can we shift from talent density to like, I don't know, collective capacity or something instead? And I don't know. I'm kind of thinking in my mind of, how is that shift going to happen of all of us like not working in silos, trying to get things done as quickly as possible, optimize to actually creating things that last. So I hope some of that made sense, but it was a bit of a ramble.
No, it made absolutely perfect sense, and fascinating how you seem to be gravitating less towards the actual, the demands of performance itself, but the thing that performance is in service of. This notion of making decisions that age well, I think is really is really powerful. And from what you're saying, I get the sense that what you're seeing is performance is driving pace and speed, which is perhaps not supporting great long-term thinking or decision making, that we're sort of everly optimizing things and becoming ever more sort of insular in our perspectives around them.
Yeah, and I mean, it has to be a balance. Like, of course, there's things you want to set goals, you want to have KPIs, you want to track towards them. Like that's important. You want to, make incremental improvements, you want to get better. And it's nice to know where you stand as an employee, in any organization. I just think the sort of, I'm coming from the world of tech too, yeah, software tech sort of, and it's like a very yeah, the word talent density is still gives me like trigger warnings from like coming from that world. So yeah, I think that's a lot of it, but yeah.
Yeah, yes, no, talent density. Let's hope we never hear that phrase again in the rest of our careers. Um, I believe that the poll is finished. Before I go to Becky, there we go. Okay, so a bit of a mix there, but we've got some sort of those of you who voted. Just over half of you sort of fairly confident that EVP um, is in support of the performance agenda, which is good to hear. Although it looks like you've got a sort of a reasonable chunk, about a quarter of you, either not or not at all confident or haven't really aligned on that yet. That's thanks for sharing that with us. There's also some fantastic conversation going on in the chat here as well. I just wanted to call out. I think that who was it here? Yeah, Michael, actually, just on the values point. Raising the point that we should be actually thinking as much about what people shouldn't be doing as well as what they should, and actually just generally actually a lot of conversation here about the longevity of values too. But before we go on to that, Becky, I'd be really interested to hear what you have been thinking about around this kind of challenge of performance. Do you see and do you share sort of some of Ryan's concerns about, optimizing performance, perhaps diminishing our ability to make good decisions for the long term, or do you see it in slightly more benign light?
So I kind of do lean towards what Ryan was saying here. I think there's a few things that I've picked up from what you were saying there, Ryan. I think where people are trying to be the high performer, everyone wants to have that thing where they come in and they're like, I've changed the company. That is inevitably short term, right? People are coming in and they're doing things for their own benefit. They're like, if I do this, I then become, the superhero. I become the moment. And that inevitably shifts you away from collaboration, culture, again, long-term thinking. Because if people are coming in being a bit like, in this short-term window, I'm going to do X thing and I'm going to do it brilliantly. All of that stuff around culture, collaboration, coming together, thinking of things through for the longer term benefit, that all falls by the wayside. So that whole piece around performance has to be really, really closely balanced, because if you are, again, like a legacy brand, you want your company is here for the long term, and you're not just doing it for the short term to sell off to, private venture capitalists to make the money and go. If you want that brand and that company to exist longer, you can't just be all about performance, because it will inevitably drive people in who are about performing right here and right now, and not thinking about what does this mean for the company in 15, 20, 50 years time when I'm no longer around. So I definitely agree with that. The thing that I'm finding really difficult with performance, and it actually, Brooke, really leans in nicely to the big trends that you were sharing, is it's become a buzzword already. We're a high performing culture. If every company says they're high performing, no company is high performing, right? It doesn't make sense. So for me, it just feels like it's becoming a non-word, along with a lot of other corporate jargon. So unless companies get to the point where they really define and they're very explicit about talking about, this is what we mean by high performance, this is what we mean and how we expect you to work. And that could be even as simple as, we are high performing, therefore there is going to be expectation that you're going to be available outside of hours. There is an expectation that if there is a project to get over the line, deadlines do not slip. There needs to be really, really explicit information shared with current employees and with talent, to say to them, high performance here means X, Y, and Z. Because if everyone's saying it, it no longer becomes a differentiator. It no longer becomes anything that makes you special, unique, or different. And again, you want the right kind of high performing for the kind of company that you're trying to drive and build as well. So I don't necessarily think it's landed not that it hasn't landed well with people, but it's landed as well as any other kind of buzzword corporate jargon will have landed, because it's so vague and can be kind of interpreted in so many different ways. It kind of feels a bit meaningless on its own, without all of that evidence, without all of that information that backs up behind it around what is there and what we need to do about it. And then a third and final point on this one, with high performance, and again, Ryan, you were talking about taking those moments as a team to dream big, to have speakers to come and join together and do that great stuff. If you want people to work in a way that is creative, therefore adding value to your business, because you need creativity and decision making. Creativity is born out of a certain amount of boredom, for want of a better word, right? People need to have that downtime to be able to kind of take everything in and think things through differently. If you're just kind of pushing people to go, they're never going to have the time and space to take a step back and to kind of come up with those new ideas that are going to springboard things forward. So I think we talk about performance and we don't talk about how we balance that to get what we need out of people that is actually going to deliver value to the business. So I don't necessarily think it's landed particularly well, because there's too much vagueness around it from my from my perspective.
for your liking.
Yes, yeah, I like it very clear.
Far too vague. No,
And just one thing on that I want to add to, and I yes, like I so relate to everything that you're saying, Becky. And there's like this element too of like performance hasn't landed, I think, because there's not a lot of clarity of like what that even means in a lot of organizations. It's like performance of what? And then it's like performance becomes this fear word of like, well, if I'm not performing, then I'm going to be let go, you know? And I think that is, you know, that is the association I think that a lot of people have with this word now too, when it's like, to your point, it's like we have to get clarity about what this actually means and like what are we measuring and what is performance here and what does high performing teams look like? Is it how we're collaborating, or is it like how much stuff we've shipped that, you know, doesn't actually make an impact? So anyways, I just wanted to throw that in, but yes, 1,000% to everything you said.
No, so true. It was the point that really resonated with me as well, because we're hearing this a lot from our clients talking about wanting to create high performance cultures. And there's this, you can see almost the fear fall over the faces of employees who are thinking, does this just mean like I've just got to work harder now? You know, whereas the reality is that I think when you start interrogating and challenging and kind of going, what do you mean by high performance? I think that, as you're both saying, I think sometimes high performance actually can be quite invigorating if it's in service of something and if it's about making things better and doing things with more imagination or with more creativity or with more passion. You know, it doesn't have to just mean doing everything faster and harder and at twice the intensity. But yeah, I completely agree. Actually working out what an organization means by high performance, I think is critical to that. Um, Bridging a little bit from that actually, and it's something actually that Ryan, you touched on earlier when you were talking about friction, and I was looking through the chat function and I wonder whether this might be a little bit of something that someone called Chris was talking about in terms of highlighting old existing skills and reinvigorating them. Something that we're seeing a little bit out there is this idea of intentional friction. So for those of you new to this, let me explain what we mean by that. So intentional friction is the sort of the deliberate introduction of little hurdles or pauses or manual steps designed to actually sort of slow things down and encourage more sort of critical thinking, encourage better decision making, generally sort of just try and humanize work a little bit. And it's funny because I think friction was once a really sort of unavoidable part of any workflow. It was a bit frustrating, but I think in reflection, it did help us build competency and perspective, and it's kind of vanishing to AI now. So what we're starting to see emerge are growing little communities, growing movement of people seeking to try and bring a little bit of friction back into workplace, you know, whether it's a sort of you know, a bit imperfect or a little bit less efficient, but a bit more authentic. So writing an article by hand or taking your time to sort of really, you know, talk about your feelings and how you sort of thinking about something rather than getting a sort of instantly generated approximation of them. So Becky and Ryan, I'd love to hear in a moment whether this kind of idea of intentional friction it sort of resonates with you. But I'm equally, firstly, really interested to know whether this has got any traction with anyone else at all. So to our second poll, very quickly, you know, is this kind of friction, do you think it's necessary for learning, growth, you know, and ultimately actually to kind of, you know, create better performance? Or is this a crazy idea? Or is this even something that no one's heard of and we're completely barking up the wrong tree? So Lorna, if you could just trigger our second poll around, there we go, friction. You know, is this necessary? Is it useful? Do let us know. While you're thinking about that and filling out the poll, Ryan, I'll let you kick this one off because you did talk about friction earlier. So I sort of figured it was something that you've been thinking about. What sort of role do you think it plays in the employee experience?
Hmm. I mean, I this connects with me a lot because I mean we look a lot at just general marketing trends too. And there's someone I follow that called Eugene Healy. And I if you don't follow his Substack, I highly recommend you do. But he had an article about this that came out not too long ago. And just I mean, I think we're seeing it with trend reports from Gen Z and even towards Gen Alpha right now too. But there's like this not only is there like the latest flex things like wasted time and like being chronically offline, you know, but it's more things like in person, like the idea of fourth spaces, spaces where people can really connect. And I mean, we're seeing, I mean, was it Netflix that did this recently? I think Louis Vuitton, but these like really immersive spaces that are starting to like crop up now for brands. And I think it's something brands are very much paying attention to from a consumer marketing perspective, like the tactile, the slowing down, like the long lines. You know, there's something that kind of comes with community building of like having to wait in line kind of sucks, but like it can be really fun if you're with a bunch of people who are waiting in line for the thing that you're waiting for. And then it adds like this I don't know, this like engagement around it and this like community vibe around it. I think the tactile, you know, things to interrupt your work. I love writing. You know, I think that's something that our team is, you know, we're trying to encourage on our. I'm trying to encourage on with my team too. Is like at the end of every week, like actually just write. Do you have like a work journal that you can write about like what you thought about, you know, happened during the week that doesn't go in your personal diary, but is actually like something that we think about and we share together. But then, you know, for a company like H&M, it is the heritage, the legacy. I mean, we have pattern makers here. We have, you know, seamstresses, we have people sewing, we have, you know, 500 people working in fashion design here. We do everything in-house, you know. And so I think that's like there's this element of craft. And I think things like that are becoming more and more appealing for me. Working on the floor of a bakery, very much, there's a lot of friction with that. Working on the floor of a store, there's a lot of friction with that. But it's almost like you get to like, I don't know how to, if everything is frictionless, it's just like emptiness, you know? And it's like you have like AI applying to jobs with AI, talking to AI recruiters, and then it's just like, well, then what? You know, where's the creativity? And I think there's just a lot of I don't know. There's something to things like taking longer and being like slower and I don't know, not having to optimize for transactions with every step of the way. I mean, even with friendships and things like that too. I'm not gonna go like way too philosophical with this, but yes, I think interrupting things, slowing down, tactile. We're seeing that with Gen Z, we're seeing that with Gen Alpha. Like that is it helps people learn what they like and what they don't like and how to overcome things. And like there's like the tension and like the release, and that's where creative happens with that friction. So yeah, I highly recommend following Eugene Healy too. Like he's a voice that I really follow for this generation and things that are happening in marketing now, and definitely agree with that. Um, Thanks for letting me wax on about that for a moment.
No, I love that. Thanks, Ryan. I can see a very clear thread of thinking running through many of your responses. It makes me think about um, that sort of trend that we're seeing of that sort of newfound love of analog things, you know, sort of like coming back to, and I wonder if it's a bit related to that. Becky, does any of this resonate in what feels like a much more sort of logical, rigorous scientific world of AstraZeneca? Just the notion of bringing friction into that workplace sound absolutely crazy. Does anything of what Ryan's
Yeah.
saying resonate with you at all?
Yeah, and I think that's it's so interesting. And obviously, when we caught up last week, I was saying we're going to have some things that are completely different because where we are, obviously, we are trying our hardest to remove friction for our processes because for us, you know, the whole thing about getting the right medication to the right patient, we want to be able to do that as efficiently as possible because, you know, in the past, what might have taken us, you know, 50, 70 years, we want to trim that down because the sooner we can get medicines to our patients, the better it is for everyone that's affected by whichever kind of disease illness it is that we're trying to treat. And we are obviously at a point now as a company where we're going through a huge amount of work around bringing AI into all of our workflows because again, we have been a very, very traditional company. There's processes everywhere, there's documentation all over the place. It's traditionally been quite a difficult company to get things done, and you have to be able to know who to speak to, know how to find the right processes in the right places. So actually, we have traditionally had a lot of friction, and we are going through a huge amount of work to streamline that down, bring that into place. And where I see it working really well for AstraZeneca is the more we can streamline that and make, I guess, all of the stuff you have to do to get your job done as frictionless as possible. It gives all our employees the space on top to be able to collaborate better, to be able to, again, take the time to be creative and bring in more opinions and more ideas. Because, again, you need to bring in a huge amount of information, insights to be able to do that. And you can only do that if people aren't spending all of their time working out how to do like day-to-day pieces of work. So for us, it's almost like taking away the friction that we currently have frees up all of that work, which then builds innovation, which builds creativity, which allows us to move kind of faster, but in a completely different way. So it's a really interesting differentiator for us as well. And I think, again, it makes complete sense in the world that Ryan works in, that there is this whole thing around like craft and being very purposeful, especially moving away from the world of fast fashion, right? And trying to get back into that, we're making meaningful things for people. Whereas for us, it is all about how do we speed that process up in a process that has traditionally been very slow and takes a long time. Rightly so, by the way, as it should do, because these are serious medications that we're creating. But again, it's almost finding that sweet spot in between. Companies tend to swing from one extreme to the other. And again, there just needs to be that kind of like happy medium in between. But yeah, we are at the point where we're trying to reduce all that friction so that people's job is then to add value, not to navigate quite a complicated world.
Yeah, I hear you. And you know what? I think it's absolutely right and proper actually that there are different perspectives on this because I think as you've illustrated really well there, different kinds of organizations are going to have different sorts of needs. And I think what's sort of emerging from this is that there isn't probably a single point of truth on this or a canon that we can all sort of subscribe to. It's probably beholden on all of us to really think carefully and mindfully and intelligently about what our people and what our culture and what our sort of business priorities are and how best to respond to them. Again, there's way too much for me to kind of talk to all of this, but Abigail added a really interesting point around the kind of the positive possibilities of measuring performance. So I can see lots of different perspectives there. And by the way, Becky and Ryan, there's all sorts of great stuff going on in the chat function. I think Jelly Boulangerie just caught my eye. I feel like there's another conversation going on in the room next door that I've got my ear against the wall for it. Do we have any poll results of the friction? Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I think there's a little bit of actually, I think there's quite a lot of support there for the friction. I think we've got overwhelming majority believing it's essential or at least sometimes useful depending on context and very little detraction, although there's obviously one individual here who absolutely believes that efficiency should come first, and I salute your singular point of view on that. Good to know there's a bit of variation in the team. Let's stay with you, Becky, if I may, because there's something else that I think would be great to talk about, and again, it's something that I think we've touched on a little bit here. And I guess it's around the sort of the context within which this friction is now operating. In the team, we've all been sort of pondering what the next big climate within the employee landscape might be. And I think Primal in the chat window kind of touched on this sort of question of, whether wellness is still, the prevailing sort of direction for us all. We've seen over the last few years that there seems to be a kind of, a dominant idea that sort of comes to represent that particular era for employment. So during lockdown, it was actually very much wellness, I think, was very strong then. That morphed into, I think, a focus on inclusion. I think post-lockdown, I think was very, very strong. And what we've now seen, as we've been talking about before, the discourse is very much on performance. Now, we've all talked about this being perhaps the latest fad. I think you were talking about high performance being just the buzzword of the moment. What do you think is going to be the next dominant climate for the employee landscape?
Yeah, I mean, we can't really escape AI, right? And I know we talked about it earlier, but with the rise in AI and companies looking at how and where do we use it, it's going to become, again, a fundamental part of how we work. So it kind of shifts at the moment. EVPs tend to be built around come here, do your best work, have a big impact. And if we have AI doing kind of like the churn work, it will suddenly become about, again, being really explicit with people about what kind of impact are you going to be able to have here? What challenges do we need people to come in and solve for us? I feel like that is going to start to be the shift. So as AI becomes more of the kind of like fundamental bedrock, you will naturally get this whole thing around what I expect to come and add value and have an impact, because that's what you need the humans for. But what does that actually mean? Again, really explicit communications, being really open about here's the kind of problems that we're trying to solve at the moment and what we need people to come in and do for us in that. I think, again, in the past, we've been able to get away with just saying that you'll be able to deliver impact, you'll have, and obviously we use that as much as anyone else does, but I think getting to the point where that becomes much more open, I think, again, like it almost like balances out that kind of like employer-employee relationship. There's a lot happening around like gig economy. There's a lot of people now moving into a lot of fractional, so they'll kind of like move from company to company because the human part of it is about being able to come in and solve problems for businesses. Because if technically they can operate on their own with AI doing the daily churn, where do people come in over the top? How are they adding value? What does that mean? But not just in a one-way street. The expectation is that for people is that I'm happy to come and spend my time with you. But again, I want to know what I'm going to be driving, because if we're looking at skills, kind of being able to be moved around the business, it is about problem solving. It is about kind of creativity that naturally shifts things away from, I need you to come here and do this specific job. Because if it is more about solving problems and pushing the business forward, that is a completely different ball game. So as much as I don't want to sit here and say AI is the thing that's going to change everything, I do think it fundamentally moves on that kind of like psychological contract employee-employer relationship. That's the way I see things moving.
Yes, and I think actually that links very strongly to that slightly more sort of gig economy style of working. We're seeing lots more kind of side hustles going on, people looking for kind of, roles that allow them to perhaps, explore 2 or 3 different kind of interests. And so potentially being a little bit less connected with their employer than they were before. Interestingly, though, we also, though, seeing people talk about how employment and work often being the one constant and the anchor in their life as well. So I wonder whether we're starting to all form our own different kinds of attachment with work, depending on what role work fulfills for us. For some, it's a big part of their lives, and for others, less so. And I guess, the opportunity to express those differences is becoming ever greater, given the sort of fragmentation of work too. So, yeah, really interesting. Ryan, what do you think? What do you think's the next big dominant theme, or what was the word that I used? The next big climate within the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, AI is here to stay. I think there's a level of that, and I think being transparent about that too. And this semi relates to this, but I think just like knowing how your organization is using it, I think having that transparency around it and being clear, and this is something that's not going away. And so I think we also can all stop shouting about it too. Like we want AI optimized culture. It's like, yes, we all are. Yes, we're all moving there. Like, I think it's something that we all have had to, we're accepting it, right? It's part of how things are going to be moving forward. But for me, I think what I see, and this connects sort of to the tension, or that sort of piece, and those moments of like adding in some of those friction pieces. I do think heritage is going to become a lot more of employee storytelling, like the longevity of a company. Not even, I mean, if a company's been there for a long time, if a company has plans to be here for a long time, like I think there's something to that, and like that craft, even with AstraZeneca, like what you're creating and what you're doing for people and how you're changing these lives in a meaningful way, and you have been for 25 years. There's power behind that, and I think talking about. I mean, we're not going to touch too much on the piece of the intergenerational workforce, but I think, for companies that have been around for a long time too, that is something so much to celebrate. Like, we have people here that have been here for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 20, 25, 30, 35 years. And it's the norm. It's like, it's not unusual. And I think there's so much there that can be talked about and celebrated too. And I think that for me is, I think, a piece that we're at least going to see from an employer branding perspective, talking a lot more about that. And then also there's this, what was I going to say about the last piece of that? Belonging. I mean, it's one of those terms that we hear a lot, but it's one that I think, what does that actually mean when a lot of companies are pulling back their DEI efforts? I am a trans person who doesn't have to think about being trans every day at work. That is not to be taken for granted, and that's not always been my experience. And I think I'm not a unique person in that area, but also there's many areas where, to feel like you belong and you're welcomed in. And are those rituals that help you do that? Like I think not to be taken for granted in the world that we're in right now. And so I think that sort of focus on inclusion and belonging. You have a place here where you can express yourself and figure out who you are. I think that's an element. It might sound a little been there, done that, but something that is very I think needed right now.
Yeah, and something is that we all need to work so hard to make sure that all of those great gains and strides that we made to kind of change the discourse around this kind of stuff aren't completely washed away in the sort of the new political reality that everybody's facing at work as well. Interesting too, you were saying about longevity. We're seeing that we do a lot of sort of perception studies with like tech talent, for example, and we've seen there's been a real cooling on that kind of excitement around working with the startups, and actually a little bit of a pivot back towards organizations that have got a little bit more maturity and a little bit more stability around them. So, yeah, I hear that too. Folks, we're nearly out of time. We've got about 4 minutes left. What I'd like to do is give our audience listening in opportunity to ask any sort of last question or two that they might have. While you're thinking about this, I did spot a question from Kat Ivan, which I thought was quite interestingly. So let me pose that. Ryan and Becky, let you have a quick response to that, and that'll buy us 30 seconds in case anyone else has a question they would like to throw at you. But Kat asked, with increasing pressure on performance and external stress factors, is it more about wellness or well-being? Which I thought was interesting. Becky, do you want to go? Do you want to have a go at that first?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. I struggle a little bit with the whole thing around wellness and well-being being driven by companies because, and again, we've talked a lot about performance, right? And where companies are like, we expect you to be a high performer and you've got to be on all the time. And then they say, but we expect you to look after your well-being. Here's a website that will tell you how to manage stress. But the company is the thing that is causing the stress in the first place. So I think holistic wellness is probably the more of the direction it's going to go in because well-being again feels like it's saying, oh, we care for your well-being, but it doesn't show up again. It's that whole thing of like, are you doing what you're saying? So I think that holistic wellness will be for companies that actually care about it, because if you just say it just again it becomes another poster on the wall rather than anything else.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I hear you. What about you, Ryan? What's your view on this? Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, no notes on what Becky said. Yep.
No, nice. Um, any other questions for the very brilliant Ryan and Becky? You guys, you're probably not following it in the chat, but there's a lot of love here and a lot of appreciation for some absolutely fantastic points. And honestly, I think we could have gone all afternoon on this one. Really enjoyed it. I'll hand over to Kath in a moment just to sort of have a few wrap up words. But meanwhile, oh, go on. There's a very quick one then, Portia. How do we personally prepare for the capacity in time of AI?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
How do we prepare to create perhaps capacity that we're going to get in the time of AI? No,
One
oh, go on, Becky.
Yeah, one thing that we've done here is there was a period where we purposefully said we know people aren't going to be working at 100% capacity while they need space to go through, training, learning space. There's a whole program of work happening here around. It's called Thriving in the Age of AI and it is a company-wide program that everyone and again, we are all expected to go and take time to learn about that so that you understand what it means for you as much as here's AI, off you go. So I think all you can really do is give yourself the time and space to go and play with it, because if not, it'll always feel like this beast in the corner that you can't manage.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think as organizations, you can't ignore it as organizations, to your point too, like that kind of training and like how, from a people organization, how are you using it? How are you adopting it? What are the tools you're using and the ways of working? I think it's like you can't ignore it, and then you all have to kind of agree on the ways of working with it. I think that's an important piece, but
I hope that helped Pasha answer your question. I thought I'd try and squeeze one last one in there while we still had you for another 90 seconds. In that case, let me get back to my thank yous. Really enjoyed that. We could have gone on all afternoon. Some fantastic perspectives, some brilliant questions. I think as someone said in the chat function, everybody dialing in did a great job keeping that all lively and interesting too. So thank you all very much. We'll follow with a little note and thank you all for dialing in. And Kath, I will hand the mic back to you.
Thank you so much, speakers. That's brilliant. I know people are probably going to be heading off for the next call. We will be sharing this with you by email, the recording, the slides and the offers. I just wanted to mention something really important before you go. If you are able just to scan the QR code that's currently on your screen, we've currently got a survey open and it very much leads into what our speakers were talking about, how human-centric cultures unlock the potential of AI. This will only take you 3 minutes to do. We'll be eternally grateful. So if you could do that now, it would really help. We know that AI is transforming the way organizations operate, promising efficiency, speed and cost savings, but the reality we know is more sobering than that. Technology cannot alone create value. It's people that do that. And this is what the report is going to be about. So many thanks, and we will see you on our next webinar, hopefully.